Clara was only 21, but she carried on her shoulders the weight of a lifetime of sacrifice. She lived in a small neighborhood far from the city center, in a modest two-room house with her maternal grandmother, Dona Ilda, a fragile woman with a generous heart. Clara had never met her father. Her mother died when she was still a child, the victim of an infection that went untreated for too long. From that moment on, Clara learned that life isn't kind to those born without privilege, and that no one was coming to save her. Every day, Clara woke up before sunrise. She'd prepare a thin porridge for her grandmother, leave a sweet note on the table, and head out to face the crowded buses on her way to the diner where she worked as a waitress. Her uniform was worn out, her paycheck barely covered the bills, and tips were few and far between. But Clara never complained. Her greatest fear wasn't poverty, it was indifference. She made it a point to smile at every customer, even when the world seemed to spin faster just to crush those who moved too slowly. In the few quiet moments between orders, Clara let herself dream. She dreamed of a real job, the kind where people would call her ma'am instead of, "Hey, miss." She wanted to be a secretary. She knew she didn't have a college degree or the polished wardrobe others had, but she possessed something she believed was rare, a genuine hunger to learn. At night, she devoured free videos on professional etiquette, drafted cover letters, and studied spelling with an old dictionary borrowed from the public library. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching this video from, and don't forget to subscribe. Enjoy the story. Her co-workers made fun of her for it. They said she was too much of a dreamer, that someone like her would never land a job in a real company. Clara listened in silence, but she never stopped believing. Every time she walked past the mirrored buildings downtown, her heart beat a little faster. It wasn't envy. It was hope. A stubborn, unwavering kind of hope, like a flower forcing its way through cracked pavement. That week, something inside her shifted. Maybe it was the exhaustion from waiting on a miracle. Maybe it was the distant look in her grandmother's eyes, dimmer than usual. Or maybe it was just the courage that had quietly built up over years of silence. But Clara made up her mind. She printed out her resumes at the corner print shop, put on the nicest outfit she owned, a slightly yellowed white blouse, carefully ironed, and stepped out to pursue what she had always dreamed of, a chance. She just didn't know that fate was about to cross her path in the most unexpected and life-changing way. Clara stepped off the bus, her shoes already soaked from the grimy sidewalk. It was nearly 8 in the morning when she arrived in the city's financial district, surrounded by gleaming skyscrapers, men in sharp suits rushing by, and women who looked like they'd walked out of fashion magazines. She felt like a fish out of water. Her clothes, though clean, betrayed where she came from. But she took a deep breath, straightened her back, and clutched her plastic folder of resumes against her chest. It was all she had and all she needed. At every building entrance she walked into, she was met with looks that ranged from dismissive to annoyed. "Leave your resume at the front desk. Unfortunately, we're not hiring. Do you have experience as an executive assistant?" She replied politely, trying to keep the tremble out of her voice. Time passed, the buildings changed, but the feeling remained the same. Closed doors. Still, Clara didn't back down. With every no, her resolve seemed to grow stronger, because she knew it only took one yes to change everything. Around noon, with an empty stomach and aching feet, she sat down on a park bench to rest. The sky was starting to darken with heavy clouds, and the cold wind sent chills down her arms. Still, she opened her bag and checked how many resumes she had left. There was still hope. There was still time. While others were having lunch in fancy restaurants, Clara ate a buttered roll wrapped in a napkin, something her grandmother had lovingly prepared earlier that morning. Every bite reminded her of where she came from and where she hoped to go. That very day, there was one company Clara had dreamed of working at since she was 15, Norte and Lima Holding. She'd seen an article about it in an old magazine and had been fascinated ever since by its towering headquarters, the sleek logo, and the founder's story. A man who had supposedly started out as a mechanic before becoming a millionaire. It inspired her. That was the company where she'd drop off her last resume of the day, even though she knew the odds were slim. After all, she had no connections, no formal education, and certainly didn't look like a corporate professional. But she had something no resume could ever truly convey: courage. When Clara finally arrived at Norte and Lima's lobby, she was greeted by a receptionist with cold eyes and a plastic smile. "Do you have an appointment?" the woman asked without even looking up. Clara explained that she didn't, but that she would like to leave her resume. The receptionist sighed, took the envelope between two fingers, and tossed it onto a messy pile. Clara thanked her anyway. Before leaving, she looked up. At the top floor, the mirrored windows reflected the stormy sky rolling in. What she didn't know was that someone, behind one of those windows, would soon change her life forever. The sky finally opened up just as Clara was crossing the last street before the subway station. The rain came down hard and fast, as if the whole world were trying to wash away its sorrow. With no umbrella, she dashed to the cover of a random awning. Her shoulders hunched beneath the now-soaked fabric of her thin blouse. The icy wind made her teeth chatter, but she didn't complain. She was grateful she'd managed to hand out all her resumes, even if none had led to anything. Yet, from where she stood, she could see the entrance to a small cafe, almost empty. Its warm yellow lights stood in stark contrast to the gray of the late afternoon. Clara considered going in but hesitated. A single cup of coffee cost more than she could afford at that moment. Then something across the street caught her eye. An elderly man, disheveled and alone, sitting on the sidewalk with his back against a dirty wall, completely exposed to the rain. His clothes were drenched, his white hair plastered to his forehead, and his eyes, oh, those eyes. They didn't seem to beg for anything. They just accepted the abandonment like someone who had long since given up the fight. People walked past him in a hurry. Some ignored him, others quickened their steps, as if his mere presence posed some kind of threat. Clara stood there watching him for several seconds. Something about the scene disturbed her deeply. Maybe it was how much he resembled her late grandfather. Maybe it was the way no one stopped. Or maybe it was just her nature. Clara simply couldn't pretend not to see someone else's pain. Without thinking twice, she pulled out a sandwich from her bag, wrapped in aluminum foil, the one her grandmother had made for her dinner later. She crossed the street in the pouring rain, knelt in front of the man, and offered him the package. "It's not much, but it's still warm," she said with a shy smile. The old man looked at her silently, as if trying to understand whether this was real. His hands trembled as he took the sandwich. He didn't say a word. He just nodded, eyes brimming with tears. Clara then pulled out a small, worn-out umbrella from her bag, one she hadn't even thought of using. She was already soaked through anyway. She opened the umbrella and propped it above the man, covering him partially. "Keep it. I live nearby. I'll be fine," she lied, knowing full well she still had to take 2 buses to get home. The man tried to object with a weak gesture of his hand, but she was already on her feet. She smiled again and whispered, "I hope your luck turns around." Then she walked back into the storm, disappearing into the crowd of black umbrellas, unaware that she had just planted the seed of a transformation that would one day change her own life. The rain kept pouring as Clara vanished down the narrow streets, carrying with her nothing but the weight of another hard day. Meanwhile, the old man remained there, motionless, now sheltered by the small umbrella she had left behind. He hadn't spoken a single word during the brief encounter, but his eyes followed Clara until she was out of sight. The sandwich still rested untouched in his lap, not because he didn't trust her, but because he was too overwhelmed. It had been years since someone looked him in the eye without judgment, and maybe even longer since someone had knelt before him with respect. A few minutes later, he stood up with difficulty. His body ached, his knees protested, but there was a new light in his eyes. He carefully tucked the umbrella under his coat and crossed the street, entering the side door of the small cafe. The employees exchanged glances, recognizing the man, but said nothing. It was part of an unspoken agreement no one dared to question. He walked quietly to a staircase in the back and climbed to the top floor. There, a spacious room awaited him, offering a panoramic view of the city. He took off his wet coat, sat in front of a computer, and opened a notebook. He wrote just one sentence. Today, I met someone with a rare soul. His name was Otavio Lima, founder and CEO of Norte and Lima Holding, the very same company where Clara had dropped off her resume just a few hours earlier. In recent months, he had adopted an unusual routine, disguising himself as a homeless man to observe how people treated those who had nothing to offer in return. For him, it was a test of humanity, an invisible filter to find someone who couldn't be bought by status, but who could give what money never could: empathy. Otavio had been helped before, spare change, leftover food. But never like that. No one had ever offered him their own dinner with such tenderness. No one had ever covered his shoulders with an old umbrella, giving up what little comfort they had. And more than that, no one had ever said, "I hope your luck turns around," while looking him in the eyes as if they truly believed it was possible to change someone's fate. That night, as Clara arrived home exhausted, unsure if even a single resume would lead to a callback, Otavio was already on the phone with his HR team. He asked them to find the resume of a candidate named Clara, who had personally dropped it off that afternoon. He said he wanted her scheduled for an urgent interview. He didn't explain why. He simply made it clear, "Make it happen. We can't let this young woman slip away." The alarm went off at 6 in the morning. Clara, still aching from the previous day and with her wet clothes hanging over a chair, got up slowly. She'd barely slept. Her knees throbbed and her throat was sore, a sign that yesterday's downpour had come at a cost. Still, she went straight to the kitchen to prepare her grandmother's breakfast. Between sips of lukewarm tea and packing her lunch for work, Clara glanced at the remaining resumes on the table, the ones no one had even wanted to accept, and for a moment, a tightness gripped her chest. Maybe I'm just not cut out for that important people's world, she thought, trying to hold back the sadness. Before leaving, she applied a light layer of lipstick, pinned back her hair with a bent bobby pin, and kissed her grandmother's forehead. It would be just another day at the diner, filled with dirty trays, impatient customers, and shouted orders from the kitchen. But Clara never complained. In the absence of luck, she always held onto her dignity. When she reached the bus stop, her phone vibrated in her pocket with an unknown notification. The number was private. She hesitated, then something nudged her to answer. "Hello?" she said cautiously. "Miss Clara da Silva?" The voice was firm, professional, and pronounced her name with an accuracy that caught her off guard. "Yes, that's me. This is Camila Fonseca from the Human Resources Department at Norte and Lima. Mr. Otavio Lima would like to meet with you for a personal interview. Would you be available this afternoon?" Clara fell silent for what felt like an eternity. The name of the company echoed in her mind as if it weren't real. She blinked several times, glancing around as if expecting someone to step in and say it was a mistake. "Today? This afternoon?" she repeated in disbelief. "Yes, Mr. Otavio specifically asked for today. At 4 p.m. on the 20th floor. Can you make it?" "Ah, yes, of course. I thank you. Thank you so much." As the call ended, Clara stood frozen on the sidewalk, as if the world around her had paused. The sound of traffic faded. The people around her ceased to exist for a moment. She brought her hand to her mouth, trying to keep the tears from spilling. It was just an interview, she knew that. Nothing was guaranteed. But for the first time, someone had noticed her. Someone had chosen her out of so many. And most incredibly, it was the owner of the company. She ran home, nearly tripping over her own feet. She needed to find her best outfit, fix her hair, rehearse possible answers. Her grandmother greeted her in surprise, and when Clara explained, the old woman's eyes sparkled with the same unwavering faith she'd always had. "I told you, my child, God never sleeps. He saw everything." What they didn't know yet was that what Ottavio saw changed everything. Clara ran her hands over the fabric of her skirt, trying to smooth out the creases that stubbornly kept reappearing. The white blouse, washed and ironed with care, was the same one she had worn days ago, but now it seemed infused with hope. The wardrobe mirror reflected a simple image back at her, but an honest one. She pinned her hair into a modest bun, put on a small pair of earrings that had once belonged to her mother, and held tightly to her worn-out handbag as if it carried her entire life inside. This wasn't just an interview, it was a crossing, and Clara knew it. She left home 2 hours early, even though the company was only 40 minutes away. She would rather wait outside than risk being late. On the bus, she stared out the window without really seeing the city pass by. Her thoughts raced. Did they call me by mistake? Did someone pull the wrong resume? And even though she tried to convince herself it was just another shot in the dark, something in her chest told her otherwise. This was different. There was something in the air, as if the universe was finally ready to whisper yes. When she arrived at the Norte and Lima building, Clara had to steady her nerves. The revolving doors, the marble floor, the suited-up security guards, and the receptionists with headsets all felt like another universe. Each step echoed louder than the last. She walked up to the reception desk and, to her surprise, came face to face with the same woman who had taken her resume days before, the one with the plastic smile and rehearsed indifference. The receptionist looked her up and down, that same ironic smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. "May I help you?" she asked, not bothering to hide her boredom. "I have an interview scheduled with Mr. Ottavio Lima at 4 o'clock. My name is Clara da Silva." The receptionist raised an eyebrow. "With Mr. Ottavio, personally?" Clara nodded firmly, even though everything inside her was trembling. "One moment," the woman said, picking up the phone with a look of disbelief. A few seconds later, something shifted. The very same receptionist who had brushed her off now suddenly moved with urgency, calling over a security guard to escort her to the private elevator. Clara, unsure of what was happening, simply thanked her and followed the man in a dark suit to the mirrored doors that would carry her to the 20th floor. As the elevator ascended, her heart pounded, her hands went cold, and her thoughts swirled. What waited behind that door? Who really was Ottavio Lima? The elevator stopped with a soft thud. The doors opened. Clara stepped out and froze. At the end of the hallway, in front of a spacious room overlooking the city, there he was. The man she had sheltered with an umbrella in the rain, dirty, exhausted, almost invisible. And now, here he stood, upright, in a tailored suit, hair neatly combed, posture commanding, and a faint smile on his lips. Clara couldn't breathe. Her body stalled, as if time itself had bowed to that moment. Couldn't be real, but it was. "Clara," he said, with the same gentleness he had used to thank her just days before. "I've been waiting for you." Clara stood frozen at the doorway. For a second, her mind scrambled to find a rational explanation. Was he a twin? A look-alike? A case of mistaken identity? But his eyes didn't lie, it was him. The same soaked, silent man she had found beneath the storm. The same tired eyes, now lit with the calm wisdom of someone who sees the world from above. The same world that had so often shut her out. Ottavio took a few steps toward her, unhurried, like someone recognizing something rare. He extended his hand, firm, yet gentle. "Come in, Clara. Make yourself comfortable," he said, stepping aside to let her pass through the glass door. She walked in slowly, still not fully understanding. Her eyes scanned every detail of the room. The immaculate bookshelves, the leather armchair, the modern art paintings, and the massive mahogany desk that dominated the center of the space. Everything screamed wealth, power, success. But the man standing before her wore none of it with arrogance. There was a quiet depth to his presence, something timeless, as if luxury was merely the backdrop, not a shield. Clara sat down without saying a word. Her mind was still racing, trying to catch up with her body. "You must be surprised," he said with a soft smile. She nodded slowly. You're the owner of the company?" "Yes, I'm Otavio Lima, president of Norte and Lima Holding, and I personally requested for you to be called in." Clara frowned, even more confused. "But why?" He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands on the desk. "In recent years, I've developed a rather unusual habit. From time to time, I go out into the streets dressed in old clothes, purposefully unkempt, and sit on sidewalks throughout the city. I observe, I listen, and most importantly, I watch how people treat those who have nothing. Most don't see, don't look, don't hear." Clara watched him, heart pounding, as if she were in the middle of an impossible movie. "But you, Clara," he continued, locking eyes with her. You saw me as a human being. You gave me what you had. You shared your dinner. You handed me the only umbrella you carried. And above all, you wished me luck. And you meant it. That, my dear, is worth more than any MBA." She blinked, feeling her eyes fill with tears, unsure of what to say. She never imagined that silent act, done with no expectation of anything in return, had been noticed, let alone acknowledged. "I don't do this out of charity. I do it out of conviction. The right people don't always have polished resumes or fluent English, but they carry principles. And that, no one can teach. You passed my test, Clara, without even knowing it. And that's why you're here." The room fell silent for a few seconds. Clara placed her hand over her chest, trying to steady her emotions. The day that had begun like any other was now the day everything would change. She just didn't yet know how far that open door would take her. Her hands still trembled in her lap as she tried to process every word she had just heard. She felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Not out of fear, but because she had no idea how to handle something so unexpected, so immense. In front of her, Otavio Lima remained calm, watching her like someone admiring something truly valuable. He didn't seem to be in a rush. It was as if that moment had been years in the making and was finally unfolding. "Clara," he began, his voice low and steady, "I could have called anyone in for this conversation, but I chose you, and not just because of that moment in the rain. That was only the beginning." She looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" Otavio offered a faint smile, then stood and walked over to a bookshelf behind his desk. He pulled out a simple black folder and placed it in front of her. "After our encounter, I asked for your background to be looked into, not out of suspicion, but because I needed to be sure you truly were who you seemed to be. And you exceeded every one of my expectations." Clara's eyes widened, a mix of surprise and embarrassment. "You investigated my life? Your school records, your references, your work routine, your visits to the public library, even the notes you leave your grandmother every morning, handwritten, stuck to the fridge. I wanted to understand where so much kindness came from, and I found exactly what I imagined. A young woman who learned to survive with dignity, without ever losing her tenderness." Otavio's words washed over her like warm waves, overwhelming, but comforting. For the first time in her life, someone saw all of her. Not just the waitress, not just another face in the crowd, but a full, complex human being, strong and deserving of something more. "Clara, I want to offer you a position on my personal team. This isn't just a job. It's a doorway into a new world. I want you to start as my trusted assistant. You'll learn from me, grow, and if you choose to, You can go far beyond that." She swallowed hard, trying to hold back her tears. "But why me? I never went to college. I don't even know how to behave in places like this." "And that's exactly why you belong here, because you know what it means to fight. You know what it's like to be hungry and still share what little you have. People like you aren't shaped by diplomas. You were shaped by life. And that is the most valuable kind of experience there is." Clara took a deep breath, her eyes clouded with emotion. For the first time, she didn't feel small in that place. She felt worthy. Ready or not, she knew she had to accept, because it wasn't just about her. It was about everything she'd endured to get there. It was about honoring her grandmother, her mother's memory, and the little girl who used to stare at skyscrapers and dream of walking through their doors. "I accept," she said, her voice trembling. "I accept with all my heart." Ottavio stood and extended his hand once more. "Welcome, Clara. Starting today, your story will be written a different way." The next day, Clara woke up before her alarm even went off. For the first time in years, the butterflies in her stomach weren't from fear, but from something new: excitement. She made coffee, fixed her hair, put on the most presentable outfit she had, the same one she wore to the interview, and packed a small bag with a notebook, a pen, and an envelope with her documents. Everything was simple but carefully and lovingly prepared. As she said goodbye to her grandmother, Dona Ilda's eyes were filled with proud tears. "You're not just going to a job, my dear. You're stepping into the life you always deserve." Out of respect, Clara decided to stop by the diner before heading to the company for her first day. She wanted to say goodbye to her coworkers and thank the manager for the opportunity she'd been given. As she walked in, she was met with a mix of surprise and barely concealed mockery. Dressed differently, neater than usual, she immediately drew everyone's attention. The counter coworker, who had so often spoken to her with condescension, crossed her arms and smirked. "What's this, Clara? Another interview?" she asked, giving her a head-to-toe glance. "Actually, no. I just came by to say thank you. Today's my first day somewhere else," she said gently. "Somewhere else? Like where?" "At Norte and Lima," she replied, with a shy but steady smile. The laughter echoed like gunshots in the awkward silence. "Oh, right. And tomorrow you're going to be NASA's new director." One of the waiters scoffed. "Who got you in there, Clara? Your guardian angel?" The manager mocked openly. She just smiled, didn't snap back, didn't get offended. She had learned that some people can only see the world through envy, and there's nothing more elegant than letting time answer for you. Clara walked out with her head held high. She waited at the bus stop like she always did. But this time, what stopped in front of her wasn't a crowded bus. It was a black car with tinted windows and a uniformed driver. He stepped out, opened the door, and said casually, "Miss Clara da Silva? I'm here to take you to company headquarters." The silence on the sidewalk was absolute. Everyone saw it. Everyone understood. And no one said a word. They didn't need to. During the ride, Clara kept her gaze on the window. Her heart beat hard, not from pride, but from gratitude. She knew this wasn't magic. It was the result of a choice made in silence, in the rain with no cameras, no audience. A choice that now unfolded into consequence. When she arrived at the company, she was received with respect. The same receptionist who had once treated her with disdain now avoided eye contact. Ottavio was waiting for her in the conference room, where he introduced her to the team and explained that Clara would start gradually, shadowing administrative processes, attending meetings, and observing decision-making. "You'll learn with time," he said, "but I want you to know this. You already have what's hardest to find: character." That day, Clara didn't just receive a job. She received something far rarer, the right to reinvent herself, and that she would carry with her forever. Clara arrived every day at 7:30 in the morning, half an hour before her shift officially started. No one had asked her to do this. It was her own discipline, her way of showing gratitude and commitment. She started with the simplest tasks: organizing reports, taking meeting minutes, updating spreadsheets, and jotting down notes during Ottavio's meetings with directors and investors. Even though it was all new to her, she showed curiosity, focus, and remarkable dedication. There was no arrogance in her demeanor, only a quiet confidence born from knowing her worth on the inside. The corporate environment, with its cold hallways and hushed voices, still felt intimidating at times. Many looked at her with suspicion, especially the longer-tenured employees. Where did she come from? Is she related to someone? Was she personally referred by Ottavio? There must be some story behind this. But Clara, with her reserved posture, avoided the gossip. She knew that just being there wasn't enough. She had to prove why she deserved to stay, and she would, through work, silence, and results. Ottavio, for his part, observed her from a distance. He watched her reactions, her ability to absorb everything around her, her active listening, and the respectful way she treated even the most overlooked people in the office, from the cleaning lady to the interns. One day, after a long and draining meeting, he called Clara into his office, offered her a cup of tea, and said, "Do you know why you stand out? Because you don't try to act like you already know everything. You learn, you ask questions, and that, Clara, is rare. Most people pretend to know just so they don't look weak. But you're strong because you're honest." Those words left a mark on Clara. That night, when she got home, she told her grandmother with shining eyes. Dona Ilda, holding a handkerchief on her lap, whispered, "And to think some folks still believe miracles only fall from the sky." As the weeks passed, Clara was given more autonomy. Ottavio began delegating small decisions to her. He put her in charge of coordinating a meeting with suppliers, then a quarterly report presentation. She studied late into the night, watched instructional videos, took handwritten notes. Her notebook was always filled with underlined words, mind maps, and quotes she'd picked up from Ottavio himself, like, "What matters is the solution, not the excuse. And those who respect the simple understand the complex." Little by little, the company, once a world of closed doors, began to open up before her. But Clara understood. Her mission there wasn't just to climb the ranks. It was to prove, with every action, that kindness and competence can coexist, and that no one, no matter how humble their beginnings, should feel small because of where they come from. In the reflection of the 20th floor window, she looked at herself and smiled. She was still the same Clara, but now there was something new in her eyes. A calm, steady glow, the kind worn by someone who has learned that dignity is the most elegant thing a person can wear. Over time, Clara began to be seen differently in the halls of Norte and Lima. The looks that once carried doubt were now full of curiosity. Many wanted to understand how a young woman with no college degree, a background in food service, and a quiet voice had earned the trust of Ottavio Lima, the most demanding and private executive the company had ever known. But the answer wasn't in her appearance, nor in her simple clothes. It was in the way she made even the most trivial task feel meaningful. The reports Clara prepared came with thoughtful insights. Her questions in meetings brought clarity, even when the topics were complex. More than once, she prevented operational errors simply by paying attention where others were distracted. She had no ego when pointing out solutions. And most importantly, she treated everyone with the same kindness, from the CEO to the intern who brought the coffee. For Clara, respect wasn't a formality, it was a part of who she was. Her attitude quietly began to inspire others. One of the receptionists, who used to look at her with sarcasm, started asking her for organization tips. An intern, who had once been too shy to speak up in meetings, found the courage to share his ideas after watching Clara defend her perspective with calm conviction, even in front of company directors. Little by little, Clara became more than a capable assistant. She became a symbol of something rare, the possibility of rising without losing your soul. Ottavio watched it all closely, though he never interfered. He knew that true power doesn't come from demanding respect, but from inspiring it. And Clara did that naturally. One Friday afternoon, after a long week of meetings and projects, he called her into his office once again. "How are you feeling here, Clara?" he asked, handing her a cup of chamomile tea. She smiled. "Sometimes I still feel like I'm dreaming, but then I look at my notebook, filled with ideas, and I remember that I fought for this, and I can't let it slip away." Ottavio nodded. "You won't, because you know how much it costs to get here." That night, Clara left the building later than usual. She was tired, yes, but she carried something new within her, a sense of belonging. She walked to the bus stop without the slightest hint of shame about heading home the way she always had, because now she understood that true change isn't about leaving the past behind, but about carrying it with pride, as part of your story. On the bus, an elderly man dozed with his head resting against the window, and a child asked her mother why the lady in the suit was smiling to herself. Clara smiled even more. If this was the new world she belonged to, then she would make sure to keep it human, accessible, and full of bridges where there had once been walls. It was the beginning of a new month when Norte and Lima's board announced a new hiring cycle for administrative positions. The HR department was preparing to receive dozens of resumes, and the energy in the building started to shift. As always, Ottavio observed everything carefully. He called a meeting with his core team, and at the end of the agenda, he turned to Clara, seated at his right, and said casually, "Clara, I'd like you to be part of the initial screening. I want your voice in this process." Her eyes widened in surprise. "Me? Yes. No one understands better than you what it means to have no degree, but still have value. I want that perspective on our team." The following week, Clara began sitting in on interviews alongside the HR manager. It was clear that some of the longtime employees were uncomfortable with her presence in that role, but Ottavio had been firm. She was there on merit. During the interviews, Clara listened less and observed more. She noticed the nervousness of humble candidates, the sweaty hands, the shy eyes, the clothes that, though simple, had clearly been ironed with care. In them, she saw the reflection of who she once was, and she felt a deep responsibility to be a bridge, not a barrier. It was in this context that a new chapter quietly began. Among the stacks of resumes, one name caught her eye: Mateus A. Carvalho. He had dropped his resume off at the front desk, but the envelope had been found crumpled and forgotten under a pile of papers. Clara opened it and immediately recognized the shaky handwriting, the misaligned margins, signs of someone without access to a computer, but with the courage to try. She requested that he be added to the final round of interviews. Mateus arrived timidly, dressed in worn clothes and scuffed shoes. The HR manager regarded him coolly, already preparing to dismiss him with formal politeness, when Clara stepped in. "Mateus, can you tell me why you want this position?" He looked down and answered sincerely, "Because I know what it means to work hard, because I want to take care of my mom, and because no one's ever given me a chance to show who I really am." The manager huffed, scribbling dispassionate notes on her pad. But Clara didn't write anything. She just looked him in the eyes and said, "Thank you, Mateus. That's exactly what I needed to hear." 2 days later, Mateus was hired as an administrative assistant. The news spread through the hallways with a mix of surprise and, in some corners, disapproval. But it was official, and when he arrived for his first day, it was Clara who welcomed him, with a calm smile and a firm handshake. In that moment, she knew she was giving the world back the opportunity that had once been given to her. On the other side of the building, an unexpected scene unfolded. The receptionist who had once treated Clara with disdain, and who now had multiple complaints filed for rudeness and a lack of empathy toward candidates, was called in for a meeting with HR. A few days later, she was no longer part of the company. There was no drama, no revenge. It was simply justice, the kind that life, silent and precise, knows how to carry out with perfection. That night, Clara wrote in her notebook, "Being a bridge doesn't mean carrying others. It means allowing them to cross with dignity." And she slept peacefully. It was late afternoon when Clara left the conference room and walked through the front lobby. She was flipping through her notes, distracted, when a young man standing near the entrance caught her attention. He clutched a transparent plastic folder tightly against his chest, wore a faded dress shirt, and pants far too big for his frame. He looked nervous, glancing around as if expecting someone to ask him to leave at any moment. Clara recognized that kind of silence. It was the same one she had carried in her body when it all began. She approached gently. "Good afternoon. Can I help you?" The young man, startled, stammered, I just wanted to drop off my resume." But the lady said, "They're not taking any today." Clara glanced at the receptionist. A new employee, younger and seemingly unsure. Clara stepped in, kind but firm. "It's all right. You can leave it with me." She turned to the young man and asked, "What's your name?" "Gabriel. I'm 19. I came from Marika 3 months ago. Still trying to find a place where I fit." She smiled. It was like hearing her own voice from years ago. "Gabriel, come with me. Let's have a coffee. I want to hear your story properly." His eyes widened. "Me? But I'm not even dressed right. Clothes say nothing about character, Gabriel. And I care way more about what's inside." As they walked through the corridors toward the conference room, a few employees looked on with surprise. Clara, now in a leadership role, was walking side by side with an unfamiliar young man, as if he were a guest of honor. And to her, he was, because every overlooked person in the lobby could be a bridge, a hidden talent, a forgotten chance. She knew that feeling well, and she wouldn't let anyone pass through those doors feeling less than they were. Over coffee, Gabriel shared his story. A difficult childhood, a father who abandoned them, a sick mother, odd jobs, and a dream of going back to school. Clara listened intently, asked honest questions, and when he finished, she said, "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be real. And you already are." The following Monday, Gabriel was called in for an apprenticeship position in the logistics department. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a beginning. And for someone like him, a beginning meant everything. That evening, Clara walked out onto the balcony of the 20th floor. The sun was setting behind the buildings, bathing the sky in gold. In the reflection of the glass, she saw her own face, a little more mature, but with the same glow in her eyes, the glow of someone who still believed in people. She touched the glass lightly with her fingertips, as if thanking the universe, and she whispered, "Thank you for not letting me give up when everything was silence. Today, I get to be someone's voice." The phone rang. It was Ottavio. He no longer asked if she was ready. He simply said, "Clara, we have a new challenge ahead, and I want you to lead it." And there, in the quiet of the room lit only by the golden glow of the sunset, Clara understood that her story was no longer just her own. It now belonged to everyone who had ever believed they would never get a chance. The months went by, and with them, Clara became a point of reference within Norte and Lima. What had started as a silent gesture unfolded into a subtle, yet profound, revolution. There was more empathy in the processes, more listening during meetings, more humanity in the hallways. A company once driven solely by metrics and goals now breathed a new kind of leadership, one born from lived experience, from respect, and from truth. Ottavio, though still present, had begun slowly stepping back. His health was no longer what it used to be. Still, he made a point of staying informed, especially about the projects led by Clara. Until one quiet autumn afternoon, he asked her to come to his home. It was a modest, welcoming place, filled with books and old photographs. Clara arrived with her heart heavy. She sensed that this meeting carried a different kind of weight. They sat on the porch, overlooking the garden. The air was still, and the silence between them wasn't awkward. It was meaningful. "Clara," Ottavio began, his voice low but steady, "I always knew I wouldn't be here forever, but my legacy, that needs to live on, and I want you to be the one to carry it forward." She sat in silence, unsure how to respond. Are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm naming you the new CEO of Norte and Lima, not interim, permanent. The team has already been informed. You have everyone's trust." "But I'm not like the others." "Exactly, Clara, because you're different, and because your journey is exactly what this company needs to keep making sense. You started by sharing a piece of bread. Now you'll be nourishing the dreams of hundreds." She cried, not out of fear, not out of doubt. She cried because, in that moment, she realized she had surpassed every one of her own limits. That the girl who once walked through the rain with a crumpled resume in her bag was now leading an entire company, and with it, stories like her own. The next morning, a small, intimate ceremony was held at company headquarters. Just a few guests, employees, longtime partners, and a few new faces. Ottavio, wearing a simple suit, took the stage beside Clara and gave a brief speech. "Everyone here knows I've always been a man of numbers, but I learned too late that it's people who make it all worthwhile. Some time ago, I met a young woman who taught me that without saying a word. Today, I hand over not just my position to her, but a dream. The dream of keeping this company true to what it should never have stopped being, human." The audience gave a standing ovation. Before closing the event, Clara stepped onto the stage holding a small notebook. Inside were phrases, reflections, and notes from her entire journey. She opened to the last page and read aloud. "Being a bridge doesn't mean carrying the world. It means allowing others to cross safely. I learned that from Mr. Ottavio, and I promise that as long as I'm here, no door will be closed because of appearances. Because talent, character, and dignity don't wear uniforms. They wear courage." At the exit, Gabriel, now promoted to junior assistant, was handing out keepsakes to the guests. Among them, a small card with a handwritten message from Clara. "Never underestimate the power of a kind gesture. It might be the beginning of your own transformation." And that's how, without fanfare or empty speeches, Clara became more than just a director. She became a symbol, a mirror, a living legacy of a time when compassion meant more than any title. And in the hearts of those she inspired, her name would echo as a lasting reminder that those who help from the heart quietly transform the world.